"You picked the wrong passenger to bully today," the federal agent said, his badge gleaming under the cabin lights. Most people think the scariest part of flying is the turbulence. For 14-year-old Lucas, it wasn't the air pockets that terrified him. It was the crew of Flight 402. They laughed when he boarded. They sneered when he took his first-class seat. And when they called the police to drag him off before takeoff, they thought they had won. But they didn't know who Lucas was texting, or that an FAA investigation had been launched before the cabin doors even closed. Watch carefully, because the karma that hits this crew isn't just satisfying, it's federal. The humid air of Miami International Airport smelled of jet fuel and overpriced coffee. For most travelers, it was just another Tuesday of stress and long lines, a purgatory of rolling suitcases and delayed flights. But for Lucas Jackson, a boy with a crisp fade haircut and a backpack that looked slightly too big for his slender frame, it was the threshold of a dream. He had dreamt of this moment for years, rehearsing it in his mind so many times that the reality felt almost surreal. The sounds of the terminal, the beeping of carts, the distant announcements, the shuffle of thousands of feet, were a symphony to him. Lucas wasn't just a passenger. He was an aviation prodigy. His mind was a meticulously organized database of aircraft specifications, flight procedures, and airline liveries. He could distinguish a Boeing 737 MAX from an Airbus A320 just by the shape of the winglets, a skill that had often baffled his teachers and delighted his father. He spent his weekends building scale models with painstaking accuracy, the smell of glue and paint a permanent fixture in his small bedroom. His weeknights were spent on flight simulators, not playing them like a video game, but treating them like a training exercise, logging virtual hours and practicing radio calls. Today, he was flying alone to Denver for the National Young Aviators Summit, a prestigious scholarship program he had fought tooth and nail to get into. The application process had been a grueling marathon of essays, interviews, and exams. He had poured his heart and soul into it, staying up late for weeks, fueled by a passion that bordered on obsession. When the acceptance letter arrived, his father, David, a hard-working mechanic with hands permanently etched with grease, had wept. But the real cherry on top, the detail that made this journey feel truly blessed, was the upgrade. His father had used every single frequent flyer mile he had hoarded over 2 decades, a small fortune of loyalty points accumulated through years of grueling work and rare family vacations, to bump Lucas from economy to first class. "You worked hard for this scholarship, son," David had told him at the curb, his own eyes misty as he checked Lucas's tie for the 3rd time. He had smoothed the collar of Lucas's S-shirt, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle. "You sit up front. You fly like the king you're going to be." Lucas clutched his boarding pass like it was a winning lottery ticket. The paper felt thick and important in his hand. Seat 3A. 3A. It wasn't just a seat assignment. It was a throne, a validation of his efforts, a gift of love from his father. He approached the gate for American Eagle Airways. The gate agent, a tired-looking woman named Sarah with dark circles under her eyes and hair escaping a messy bun, scanned his pass. She paused, looking at the first-class designation, then down at Lucas's sneakers and a hoodie that bore the proud logo of the Tuskegee Airmen. Her gaze lingered on the logo for a fraction of a second too long, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her face. "You're in 3A, she asked, her eyebrow arching. Sharply. "Yes, ma'am," Lucas said, smiling politely, projecting a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "My dad upgraded me." She didn't smile back. She just grunted, a low, guttural sound of disapproval, and waved him through. "Boarding Group 1 only right now. Don't block the lane if you aren't Group 1. "I am Group 1, Lucas said, pointing to the bold number on his ticket. He held it up for her to see clearly, his finger tapping the printed one. She snatched the ticket from his hand with surprising speed, squinted at it as if searching for a forgery, and then thrust it back at him, the paper crinkling. "Go," she commanded. Lucas shook off the cold reception, taking a deep breath to recenter himself. "Nothing is going to ruin this," he told himself firmly. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and walked down the jet bridge, the excitement bubbling back up in his chest. He was about to turn left instead of right, a momentous decision in the world of air travel. He was about to experience the wide seats, the warm nuts, and the respect that came with the front of the plane. He stepped onto the aircraft, the conditioned air cool and dry against his skin. Standing in the galley were 2 flight attendants. One was a tall man with slicked back blonde hair and a tan that looked sprayed on. His name tag, pinned perfectly to his immaculate uniform, read Chad. The other was the purser, a woman in her late 40s with a tight bun pulled so taut it seemed to stretch the skin on her forehead. She had a face that looked like it had forgotten how to smile years ago, etched with deep lines of disapproval. Her name tag read Brenna. They were laughing about something, a loud, cackling laugh that was performative and grating. It stopped abruptly when Lucas stepped aboard, sucked out of the air and replaced with a heavy silence. "Welcome aboard," Lucas said cheerfully, his voice sounding small in the sudden quiet. He stepped toward the first-class aisle, his eyes on the sacred 3A. Brenna didn't move out of the way. She stood in the center of the aisle like a security checkpoint, a human barricade blocking his path. She looked him up and down, a slow, deliberate inventory that started at his head and ended at his shoes. Her eyes lingered on his hoodie, the logo of the Tuskegee Airmen seeming to hold her attention for an uncomfortably long moment. Boarding pass, Brenna demanded, her hand extended palm up. Her tone was not one of a simple request, it was an accusation. Lucas handed it to her, his fingers brushing her palm briefly. "I'm in 3A, he said again, his voice steady, but a small knot of anxiety beginning to tighten in his stomach. Brenna looked at the pass, then looked at Lucas, then looked back at Chad. A silent, conspiratorial communication passed between the two crew members. Chad smirked, leaning against the galley cart with an air of casual arrogance. 3A, Brenna said, her voice dripping with skepticism and a theatrical flair that was meant for an audience. It wasn't just doubt, it was a performance of doubt. "This is a first-class seat, sweetie. Economy is past row 8. I know," Lucas said, his heart starting to thump a frantic rhythm against his ribs now. "My dad upgraded me, it's a gift." Brenna let out a short, sharp laugh, a sound devoid of humor. It was the laugh of a bully who has found a target. "A gift, right, and I suppose you're a frequent flyer, too." "Actually, I am," Lucas said, drawing on a deep well of composure he didn't know he possessed. "I'm going to the Young Aviators Summit." Chad chimed in, his voice dripping with condescension as he examined his manicured nails. "Brenna, maybe he's lost. Or maybe he found the ticket on the floor." Lucas felt the heat rise in his cheeks, a flush of embarrassment and anger. "My name is on the ticket. Lucas Jackson, you can check your manifest." His voice was firmer now, edged with a desperate need to be seen and believed. Brenna stared at him for a long, uncomfortable silence, her eyes boring into him. The line of passengers behind Lucas was starting to build up on the jet bridge, a muffled chorus of sighs and shuffling feet. "Just take the seat," Brenna muttered, shoving the ticket back at him so forcefully it fell from his grasp and fluttered to the floor. She didn't move out of the way. Lucas had to squeeze past her, his backpack brushing against her arm. He bent to pick up his ticket, the indignity of the gesture burning in his chest. "Watch it," she snapped, dusting off her uniform sleeve as if he were made of dirt, as if the fleeting contact had contaminated her. "If you damage the uniform, your parents will be paying for it." "Sorry," Lucas mumbled, though he hadn't done anything wrong. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. He found seat 3A. It was, as he had imagined, glorious. Wide, buttery leather, a real window view with a pristine pane of glass, a pre-flight water bottle waiting for him on the console, a small towel folded neatly beside it. He sat down, the seat sighing as it accepted his weight. He placed his backpack carefully under the seat in front of him, stowing it with exact precision. He pulled out his phone to text his dad. "I made it. The seat is huge." He didn't see Brenna and Chad whispering in the galley, their heads close together, their eyes fixed on him. A predatory stillness had settled over them. As the rest of the first-class cabin filled up, the atmosphere subtly shifted. A businessman in a perfectly tailored gray suit took his place in 3B next to Lucas. He settled in with the practiced ease of a seasoned traveler, and gave Lucas a polite, disarming nod. "Heading out for vacation?" the man asked, his voice a smooth baritone. "No, sir. Aviation conference," Lucas beamed, grateful for a normal human interaction. "Impressive," the man said, a flicker of genuine interest in his eyes before he opened his laptop. But the peace didn't last. As the economy passengers shuffled past in a slow river of humanity, Brenna stood at the front of the cabin, a perfect hostess to a select few. She greeted the white passengers with a dazzling, practiced smile that transformed her entire face. "Welcome back, Mr. Thompson. So good to see you again. How was your trip, Mrs. Gable? You look wonderful. Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Her voice was honey-sweet and warm, a stark contrast to the ice she had shown Lucas. But every time her gaze swept past seat 3A, the smile vanished like a light switch being flicked off, leaving only a cold, hard stare. Then the incident began. Lucas, his throat parched from the dry air and the building anxiety, reached for the water bottle that was placed on his armrest console. "Don't touch that," a voice barked, sharp and cutting. Lucas froze, his hand suspended in midair. Chad was standing over him, appearing as if from nowhere. "That water is for paying first-class customers," Chad said, his voice pitched loud enough for the first 5 rows to hear. A few heads turned. Lucas blinked, incredulous. I have a ticket. I am a paying customer." He gestured to his boarding pass, now creased and bent, which he had placed in the seatback pocket. "Upgrades don't count as full fare," Chad lied, his expression one of bland condescension. He snatched the water bottle away, tucking it behind his back. "We need to save these for the Diamond members. You can get a cup of tap water when we're in the air." The businessman next to Lucas, who was not yet wearing headphones, looked up, confused. "Excuse me," he interjected, his brow furrowed. "I'm pretty sure the water is for everyone in the cabin." Chad's smile was tight, a brittle mask. "Policy, sir. We're running low on stock. Just managing inventory." Lucas felt small. He shrank into his seat, the plush leather that had felt like a throne now feeling like a cage. His earlier excitement curdled into a thick, suffocating shame. He watched as Chad walked 2 rows forward and handed a water bottle, along with a glass of champagne, to a woman in 2A who had just sat down. "Here you go, ma'am. Please let me know if you need anything else," Chad said sweetly. Lucas turned his head and looked out the window, focusing on a luggage cart moving across the tarmac to fight back the stinging tears that threatened to spill. "Just ignore them," he thought, clenching his jaw. "Dad spent too much money for me to cry." He pulled out his logbook from his backpack, a thick, spiral-bound notebook where he recorded the registration number, aircraft type, and flight details of every plane he flew on. It was a habit he'd picked up from his favorite aviation YouTubers, a meticulous ritual that connected him to a larger community. He noted the tail number, N492A, the letters and numbers a sacred code. He was writing down the captain's name, which he'd heard over the PA system, Captain Miller, when Brenna reappeared, a phantom of hostility. "What are you writing?" she demanded, her voice a low hiss. Lucas jumped, startled. "Just my logbook. I track my flights." He held it up tentatively, as if offering proof. Brenna snatched the notebook from his hands before he could react, her fingers clamping down on the pages. She flipped through it, her eyes narrowing into slits. "Writing down names, crew details, tail numbers. Why, are you planning something?" "No," Lucas gasped, his heart hammering against his ribs. "It's a hobby. People do it all the time. It's called plane spotting." "It looks like surveillance to me," Brenna said, her voice raising an octave to a theatrical pitch, ensuring every passenger in the premium cabin was now looking up from their papers and screens. "In this day and age, we can't be too careful. Why are you recording the crew's movements?" "I'm not," Lucas pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Please, give it back." "I'll hold on to this until we land," Brenna said, clutching the notebook against her chest like a shield. "Or maybe I should give it to the captain. Let him decide if you're a security risk." "He's a kid," the businessman in 3B interjected, his voice firmer and louder this time, a sharp note of command cutting through the tension. He lowered his newspaper and fixed Brenna with a hard stare. "He's clearly just an aviation fan. Give him his book back." Brenna turned on the businessman, her eyes flashing with a territorial fury. "Sir, I am responsible for the safety of this aircraft. If I perceive a threat, I act. And a teenager traveling alone, scribbling notes about the crew, is suspicious behavior. Do not interfere with flight crew duties, or you will be removed." The cabin went silent. The threat of removal was the ultimate silencer in modern air travel, a nuclear option that could strand you in a random city, ruin a trip, and get you placed on an internal list. The businessman closed his mouth, his jaw tightening in a knot of suppressed fury. He shot Lucas an apologetic, helpless look. Lucas sat trembling, his hands gripping his knees so hard his knuckles were white. They had taken his water, treated him like a thief. They had taken his logbook, treating him like a potential terrorist. And they were looking at him like he was a criminal, an unwelcome contaminant in their sterile domain. But Lucas had one thing they didn't know about. Tucked into the side pocket of his seat, hidden by his leg, was his phone. And it was recording. He hadn't started a live stream yet, but he had discreetly opened the camera app and hit record as soon as Chad took the water. The audio was running, capturing every word. Brenna walked back to the galley, tossing the notebook onto the metal counter with a loud, dismissive thud. The sound echoed. Lucas could hear her voice clearly through the thin curtain that separated the galley from the cabin. "Little thug thinks he owns the place," Brenna whispered to Chad, her voice dripping with venom. "Probably stole the miles from someone's account. I bet the credit card bounces before we hit Georgia. Should we call the gate?" Chad asked, a soft, gleeful laugh in his voice. "No," Brenna said, and her voice dropped to a sinister, eager whisper, a sound of pure, anticipatory cruelty. "Let's wait until the doors close. Then we can have some fun. If he acts up, we divert. I need some overtime pay anyway." Lucas's blood ran cold. The air in his lungs turned to ice. They weren't just mean. They weren't just prejudiced. They were planning to provoke him. They were conspiring to create a situation where they could call him a threat and have him physically removed. They wanted him to react so they could kick him off, and they were willing to waste the time of hundreds of people and cost the airline tens of thousands of dollars in diversion fuel costs to do it. He was a pawn in their scheme for a fatter paycheck. Lucas took a deep, shaky breath. He remembered what his uncle, a lawyer, had told him once about dealing with police or any authority figure who was trying to entrap you. Document everything. Stay calm. Never get physical. He slowly lifted his phone, his movements careful and measured, shielding the screen with his body. He didn't open Instagram or TikTok. The time for public shaming was not yet ripe. He opened his email app. He began to type a message, not to his dad. His dad would just worry himself sick and couldn't do anything from the ground in Miami. Lucas typed a message to an email address he had memorized for his scholarship application, a contact he had met during a Zoom interview just 2 weeks prior. It was a long shot, a flare sent into a dark sky, but it was all he had. 2. J. Martinez at oig.gov. Subject: Urgent, discrimination on Flight 402 active incident. Dear Mr. Martinez, I am the scholarship recipient Lucas Jackson. I am currently on Flight 402 at MIA, waiting to push back. The crew has confiscated my property, denied me service provided to white passengers, and I recorded them conspiring to have me removed for their own overtime pay. They are calling me a thug. They are planning to provoke me. I am scared and I don't know what to do. Please help. He hit send. He didn't know if Jose Martinez, a mid-level investigator at the Department of Transportation's Office of Inspector General, would even check his email on a Tuesday, let alone act on it. But Lucas didn't have to wait long to find out that he wasn't the only one watching. The aircraft door thumped shut with a deep, final boom, sealing the cabin in pressurized silence. The distinct whir of the APU kicked in, and the air conditioning vents hissed with renewed vigor, sending a chill down Lucas's spine. For most passengers, this was the moment to relax, kick off their shoes, and hunt for a movie. For Lucas, sitting rigidly in 3A, it felt like being locked in a cage with two predators circling the perimeter. He kept his head down, staring blankly at his phone screen. A notification appeared. He had received an automated reply from the Department of Transportation. Thank you for your submission. Your message has been received. It was a form letter, cold, impersonal, and devoid of hope. A sinking feeling, heavy like a stone, settled in his stomach. No one was coming to save him. He was at 30,000 feet, or about to be, and the law up here was whatever Brenna and Chad said it was. The fastened seat belt sign chimed on. Chad moved through the first-class cabin doing the final safety check. He walked past the businessman in 3B, smiled a perfectly professional, ingratiating smile, and said, "Sir, could you bring your seat back upright for departure?" "Thank you." Then he reached Lucas. Lucas's seat was already upright, rigidly so. His tray table was stowed and latched. His bag was securely under the seat in front of him. He was the picture of a perfect passenger. Chad leaned in, his cologne a suffocating mix of cheap musk and stale tobacco. "Give me the phone," Chad whispered, his voice a low, menacing growl. Lucas looked up, startled. "What? The phone?" Chad repeated, his eyes hard and unblinking. "Electronic devices must be in airplane mode. I need to verify you aren't transmitting signals that could interfere with navigation." "It is in airplane mode," Lucas said, turning the screen to show the little airplane icon in the corner. See, the icon was there, clear as day. Chad snatched the phone out of Lucas's hand with a violent, jerking motion. "Hey," Lucas cried out instinctively, his hand reaching for his property as a reflex. "Don't touch me," Chad shouted, recoiling dramatically as if Lucas had thrown a haymaker. He played it to the gallery perfectly, stumbling back against the bulkhead, clutching the phone to his chest, his eyes wide with feigned shock and fear. It was a breathtakingly cynical performance. "Captain, we have a situation." The cabin went dead silent. The businessman in 3B lowered his noise-canceling headphones, his head swiveling to take in the scene. "He didn't touch you," the man said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "He just reached for his phone. I saw the whole thing. Stay out of this, sir." Brenna barked from the front galley, charging down the aisle. She had been waiting for this very moment. She unbuckled her jump seat strap and marched over with the righteous fury of a general leading a charge. The cockpit door opened. Captain Miller, a man with gray temples, a deeply lined face, and a look of profound exhaustion, stepped out. He looked annoyed to be pulled away from his pre-flight checks right before pushback. "What is going on back here?" Miller demanded, his voice clipped and impatient. "We have a slot time to hit. If we miss it, we're waiting an hour." He lunged at me, "Captain," Chad lied, his voice trembling with a performance worthy of an Oscar. "I asked him to turn off his device. He refused, and when I tried to check it for compliance, he took a swing." "I didn't." Lucas's voice cracked, the sound of his boyhood colliding with a cold, adult conspiracy. He was 14 years old, but in that moment, he felt about 6. "I showed him it was in airplane mode. He grabbed it out of my hand. I just wanted it back. I swear." Captain Miller looked at Lucas. He saw a black teenager in a hoodie. He saw a kid, but his perception was filtered through a lifetime of unconscious bias, a lens ground by society itself. Then he looked at his crew, his colleagues, people he flew with every week, people he trusted with his life. The bias was unconscious, instant, and devastatingly effective. The word of a child against the coordinated testimony of two uniformed professionals. "It wasn't a contest, son," Captain Miller said, his voice hardening into flint. Assaulting a flight crew member is a federal offense. It's a felony. I can have the police waiting for you in Denver, or I can have them drag you off right now in Miami and you can sit in a juvenile detention center. Which one do you want? I didn't assault anyone, Lucas pleaded, tears pricking hotly behind his eyes. The world was collapsing into a nightmare. Ask him, he said, his voice trembling as he pointed to the businessman in 3B. Ask the witness. The captain glanced at the businessman with a look of weary impatience. The kid is telling the truth, Captain, the businessman said, his voice steady and clear, a voice accustomed to boardrooms and negotiations. Your steward was aggressive. He took the boy's property without cause, and the boy simply asked for it back. There was no lunge, no swing. I'd stake my reputation on it. Brenna stepped in smoothly, her years of experience in emotional manipulation on full display. Captain, she said, her voice oozing with false concern, this passenger in 3B has been disruptive since boarding. He's been undermining crew instructions and encouraging the boys' non-compliance. I believe they might be traveling together and this is a coordinated act. It was a master stroke of manipulation, a perfect, poisonous lie. By linking the credible witness to the perceived aggressor, she discredited him entirely. Captain Miller sighed, a heavy, defeated sound. He didn't have time for an investigation. He had a schedule to keep, fuel to burn, and 150 other passengers waiting. Look, he said, turning back to Lucas, his voice a low growl. You sit on your hands. You don't speak to the crew. You don't look at the crew. If I hear one more peep, one more complaint, I'm calling this in and we are turning this plane around and coming back to this gate. Do you understand me? Yes, sir, Lucas whispered, his voice so small it was barely audible. He could feel every pair of eyes in the cabin burning into him. Chad, give him the phone back, Miller ordered, already turning to retreat to his sanctuary of the cockpit. But keep an eye on him. Chad smirked, a victor's grin, and dropped the phone into Lucas's lap. Oops, he muttered with theatrical carelessness as it bounced off his lap and clattered to the floor. Miller went back into the cockpit. The door clicked shut and the lock engaged with a mechanical finality. Lucas leaned over and retrieved his phone from the floor with shaking hands. He didn't dare unlock it. He didn't dare look up. He felt the eyes of every passenger on him like a physical weight. Some were sympathetic, a few faces holding a silent, powerless sorrow. But most just looked annoyed, their faces pinched with the frustration that he was the source of the delay, a troublemaker delaying their arrival. Brenna grabbed the PA system handset. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, her voice a syrupy sweet, professional purr, we apologize for the delay caused by a disruptive passenger in the forward cabin. We are now cleared for pushback. Please ensure your seat belts are fastened. She stared directly at Lucas as she said the word, disruptive, letting her gaze bore into him, making sure he felt the label being seared into his identity for the whole plane to witness. The tug pushed the plane back from the gate. The massive engine spooled up, a low whine rising to a powerful roar. Lucas looked out the window as the terminal building drifted slowly away, a concrete monolith shrinking into the distance. He felt a profound, soul-crushing sense of isolation. He was trapped in a metal tube hurtling toward the stratosphere with people who wanted to hurt him, people who had the full authority of the federal government and a compliant captain behind them. He thought about the email he sent. Pointless, he thought bitterly. Just pointless. But as the plane began its long, rumbling taxi toward the runway, Brenna wasn't done. She walked past Lucas's seat, leaning in close so only he could hear. The smell of her overly sweet perfume mixed with the stale recirculated air. You think you're clever writing. In your little notebook, she hissed, her lips barely moving. I read it, Captain Miller and N492A. You know what we do with spies. We put them on the no-fly list. When we land in Denver, I'm filing a report, and I promise you, it will stick. You'll never set foot on a plane again. Enjoy the bus, kid. She straightened up and walked away, her hips swaying with vicious satisfaction. Lucas felt like he couldn't breathe. The no-fly list, for writing down tail numbers. It sounded like the ravings of a madwoman, but her confidence was absolute. His meticulously planned future, the dream of being a pilot, the scholarship he had bled for, it was all dissolving right in front of his eyes because two people decided they didn't like the color of his skin and the age on his ticket. The plane turned onto the taxiway. The safety demonstration played on the screens, a chirpy video of happy people buckling belts. Lucas stared blankly at it, his mind a white static of panic. Ding! The flight deck chime sounded, a single soft note. The plane slowed to a crawl, then with a final lurch, came to a complete stop. Lucas looked out the window. They weren't near the runway yet. They were on a service taxiway, stranded between other waiting planes. The engines idled down from a roar to a low hum. A strange, expectant silence returned to the cabin. The silence on a plane that isn't moving is heavy. It carries the weight of missed connections and ruined schedules and 100 unspoken anxieties. Ladies and gentlemen, "This is the captain," Miller's voice crackled over the speakers. He sounded confused, a far cry from his earlier authoritative tone. Folks, we've just received an unexpected order from the tower to hold our position immediately. Not sure what the issue is. Might be a traffic flow backup or a minor paperwork error on our end. We'll update you as soon as we know more. Please just sit tight." In the galley, Brenna rolled her eyes theatrically at Chad. "Probably a bag match issue. The ground crew is incompetent today," she groaned. "Maybe they realized we have a VIP on board," Chad joked, nodding toward the empty seat in 1A. They both chuckled. Lucas sat frozen. He clutched his phone, feeling its cold, solid weight in his hand. He noticed he had one flickering bar of signal. He refreshed his email. Nothing. The inbox remained stubbornly empty. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The air in the cabin grew stuffy and warm. People began to shift restlessly. Then the captain came back on the PA. This time his voice wasn't confused. It was tight, strained, and laced with a new, unnamed anxiety. "Folks, flight control has ordered us to return to the gate immediately," he said, the words clipped. "We have been instructed that law enforcement needs to board the aircraft to resolve a security issue. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened and stay calm." A collective groan of frustration went through the economy cabin, but in the front galley, Brenna's face lit up like a Christmas tree. She grabbed Chad's arm, her fingernails digging into his uniform sleeve with an almost erotic excitement. "They're coming for him," she whispered, her voice trembling with ecstatic joy. "I told you." The captain must have radioed ahead about the assault. "Finally, someone is taking this seriously." Chad grinned, looking at Lucas with predatory glee. "Oh, this is going to be good. Federal marshals don't play around. They'll put the fear of God in him." Brenna marched into the aisle. She didn't even use the PA system. She just projected her voice, loud and triumphant, so the first few rows could hear. "Everyone, please remain calm. We are returning to the gate to remove a security threat. This is for your safety." She looked directly at Lucas. Then she pointed at him. With 2 fingers, and with a cruel smile, she mimicked a pair of handcuffs clicking around her wrists. Lucas's stomach turned to water. The businessman in 3B leaned over, his face grim and determined. "Kid, if they arrest you, I'm coming with you. I saw everything. I'll be your witness. They are not going to railroad you on my watch." "Thanks," Lucas whispered, but his throat was so dry it hurt. He was terrified. Had Brenna really convinced the pilots to call the cops on him? Was he about to be dragged off in handcuffs in front of 100 people, his name plastered on the news as a teen air raid suspect? The plane lurched forward, making a sharp, shuddering U-turn on the tarmac. It taxied back to the terminal much faster than it had left, the pilot's urgency palpable. As they approached the gate, Lucas saw an array of flashing lights, blue and red strobes bouncing off the glass of the jet bridge. There wasn't just one police car. There were 3, and 2 black SUVs with official government plates. The full might of the state had been summoned. "Wow," the businessman murmured, his eyes wide. "That's a lot of heat for a cell phone dispute." The plane docked with a heavy jolt. The seatbelt sign flicked off. "Remain seated," Brenna shouted, asserting her authority for what she believed would be the final, glorious time. "Nobody stands up until the officers have cleared the aircraft." She stood by the cockpit door, crossing her arms with a smug smile plastered on her face. She was ready for her moment of glory, the hero flight attendant who identified the threat and saved the day. The cabin door opened with a whoosh. A rush of warm, humid Miami air entered, followed immediately by 4 people. 2 were Miami-Dade police officers in full uniform, their hands resting near their holstered weapons. One was a man in a dark suit with an earpiece, clearly an air marshal or a federal agent, his posture rigid and watchful. And the 4th person was a man in a slightly rumpled linen shirt, holding a tablet. He looked out of breath, as if he had run all the way from the parking garage. Brenna stepped forward, beaming, her arms outstretched as if to welcome them. "Officers, thank goodness. The passenger is in 3A. He assaulted a crew member, has been recording security protocols, and we have reason to believe he is a threat to this aircraft." She pointed an accusatory, trembling finger at Lucas. The man in the rumpled linen shirt didn't even look at Lucas. He walked directly toward Brenna, his eyes never leaving her face. "Are you Purser Brenna Higgins?" the man asked, his voice calm but carrying immense authority. "Yes, that's me," Brenna said, her confident beaming smile faltering into a look of confusion. "Why weren't they rushing toward the boy?" The man looked at his tablet, then at the federal agent in the suit. And his flight attendant Chad Wilson present. Chad poked his head out from the galley, his cocky grin still in place. "Right here, I'm the victim, I'm the one he assaulted." The man in the linen shirt stepped into the aisle, effectively blocking Brenna's path to Lucas. He held up a badge that hung around his neck. It wasn't a police badge. It was the gold and blue eagle of the Department of Transportation, Office of the Inspector General. I am Senior Special Agent Jose Martinez, Office of the Inspector General, the man announced, his voice carrying to the back of the plane like a thunderclap. I am issuing a federal stop order on this flight. Brenna's smile completely evaporated. A stop order for the boy? She asked, her voice suddenly small. Martinez ignored her. He turned to the captain, who was standing in the cockpit doorway, his face a mask of utter bewilderment. Captain Miller. Yes, Captain, Miller said, a little lost. I have received credible evidence of a violation of 49 U.S. Code, Section 40,127, the prohibitions on discrimination, specifically racial discrimination, and the falsification of a federal security report by your crew. The color drained from Brenna's face so fast it was as if a plug had been pulled. She went from a triumphant pink to a sickly, ghost white as the blood retreated from her skin. What? Brenna squeaked, her voice a high-pitched chirp of panic. Martinez turned to Lucas. The tough, authoritative agent's expression softened slightly. Mr. Jackson. Lucas stood up on legs that felt like rubber. Yes, sir. Did you send me an email 12 minutes ago with an audio file attached? Yes, sir, Lucas said, his voice filled with disbelief. I didn't think you'd get it so fast, or even read it. I have a filter for keywords like, crew conspiracy, and, OIG, Martinez said, a small, grim smile touching the corner of his lips. And I happened to be in the terminal today, conducting a random audit on American Eagle's maintenance logs. Your message came through on my tablet like an alarm. I heard it as I was walking past this gate. Martinez held up his tablet. He pressed play. The audio was crystal clear, a perfect digital recording. The cabin was absolutely silent, so everyone heard it. Brenna's voice, dripping with contempt and malice, filled the first-class cabin. Little thug thinks he owns the place. I bet the credit card bounces before we hit Georgia. Then Chad's voice, should we call the gate? And then Brenna, clear as a bell, no. Let's wait until the doors close. Then we can have some fun. If he acts up, we divert. I need some overtime pay anyway. The recording ended. The silence in the cabin that followed was heavier than the silence of a held plane. It was the silence of absolute, moral shock. The businessman in 3B started laughing, a loud, barking laugh of pure, unrestrained vindication. Overtime pay. They were going to divert a plane full of people for overtime pay. I heard it, but hearing it again played back, this is incredible. Brenna looked at the captain, her expression wild and pleading. Captain, that's taken out of context. We were joking. It was just galley talk. Black humor. Everyone does it. Captain Miller's face went from confused to a deep, mottled purple of absolute rage. He looked at Brenna with a gaze that could have melted steel. You lied to me, he hissed, his voice shaking with fury. You stood in my cockpit doorway and you lied to me. You told me he assaulted Chad. You told me he was a security threat. You used me to make a false report of a federal incident. Captain, quiet, Miller snapped, his voice echoing through the aircraft. Don't say another word. Agent Martinez stepped closer to Brenna and Chad, his face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. Brenna Higgins, Chad Wilson, I am detaining you both for questioning regarding conspiracy to violate civil rights and interference with flight crew members, specifically, manipulating the pilot and command with false information to instigate a law enforcement response. Chad's knees actually buckled. He had to grab the galley counter with both hands to stay upright. Arrested, he sputtered, but I have a date tonight. A police officer stepped forward with handcuffs, his face impassive. Cancel it, he said flatly. Wait, Brenna screamed, her composure shattering into a million pieces as the officer grabbed her wrist. Her voice was a raw shriek of entitlement crumbling. You can't do this. I have seniority. I've been with this airline for 20 years. He's just a kid. He's lying. The recording is illegal. The recording isn't lying, ma'am, the officer said, spinning her around with practiced ease and pulling her arms behind her back. Click, click. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting tight echoed through the silent cabin. It was a sound of utter, irreversible finality. Lucas watched, wide-eyed. He wasn't smiling. He was too in shock to smile. He just watched as the two people who had made him feel like garbage for the last hour were marched down the aisle, past the very economy passengers they had tried to impress with their authority. Brenna's perfectly pressed uniform was now wrinkled, and her tight bun was starting to come undone. You're making a mistake, she shrieked as they dragged her onto the jet bridge. I'll sue the FAA. My brother is Robert Higgins. You'll all be fired. Martinez watched them go with a look of cold detachment, then turned back to the captain. Captain Miller, this flight is canceled. You have no operating cabin crew. I understand, Miller said, rubbing his temples with his thumb and forefinger. He looked like a man who had just woken from a bad dream to find his house on fire. He then looked at Lucas, a long, painful stare. Son, Miller struggled for words, his throat working. He realized, with a cold, sudden clarity, that he had been a pawn. Worse, a willing pawn. He had almost ruined an innocent boy's life because he had blindly, without a second thought, believed the white adults in uniform over a black child. "I owe you an apology," Miller said, his voice thick with shame. "A big one. I am so sorry." "It's okay," Lucas said softly, his voice still shaky. "No," Martinez interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It's not okay, and it's not over." He looked at Lucas, his stern expression melting into one of genuine reassurance. "Grab your bag, Lucas. We need to take your formal statement. And don't worry about the Aviator Summit. I will personally make sure you get to Denver." Lucas grabbed his backpack. He then walked over to the galley counter and retrieved his logbook, still sitting where Brenna had tossed it. As he walked off the plane, the businessman in 3B stood up and started clapping, a slow, deliberate sound that was soon joined by the lady in 2A. Then the entire economy cabin, who had heard the commotion and the shouting, started clapping too, a standing ovation for the kid who had fought back. Lucas walked down the jet bridge, the applause following him like a wave. But as he entered the terminal, he realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was just changing shape. Because Brenna Higgins wasn't just a flight attendant. She was the sister of a very powerful man in Miami, a city councilman named Robert Higgins, a man who hated bad press with a passion and hated federal interference in his domain even more. And while Brenna sat in a holding cell, her face streaked with mascara, she was already making her one phone call. The holding room at Miami International Airport was nothing like the first-class cabin. It was a windowless box with beige walls, fluorescent lights that hummed like angry bees, a single metal table bolted to the floor, and the faint, stale smell of old coffee and anxiety. Lucas sat at the table, a can of Sprite that Agent Martinez had gotten for him untouched in front of him. Martinez was typing furiously on his tablet, his face a study in concentration. "My dad is freaking out," Lucas said, his voice quiet. He saw the news ticker at work. It said, "Security breach at NIA involving minor. He thinks I'm going to jail and he can't get here fast enough." "You are not going to jail, Lucas," Martinez said without looking up. "You are the witness. Actually, you're the whistleblower. You're the hero of this story, and you have more power than you realize." The door to the small room flew open with a bang. It wasn't a police officer. It was a man in a navy blue suit that cost more than Lucas's dad made in a year. He had perfectly coiffed silver hair, a deep, practiced tan, and a smile that looked like it was carved out of marble, beautiful, but cold and hard. He was followed by two younger men in equally expensive suits carrying briefcases. This was Councilman Robert Higgins. He was a fixture in Miami politics, the kind of man who cut ribbons on new highways, had dinner with the chief of police, and considered the city his personal fiefdom. "Agent Martinez," Higgins boomed, his voice overly loud and perfectly projected, filling the small room with an unwanted presence. "I wasn't aware the Department of Transportation was in the business of kidnapping children based on hearsay and illegal recordings." Martinez stood up slowly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. "Councilman Higgins, I wasn't aware city council members had jurisdiction over federal aviation investigations into racial discrimination and conspiracy. I have jurisdiction over the well-being of my constituents," Higgins countered, stepping into the room and bringing his cloud of expensive cologne with him. He didn't look at Lucas with kindness but with a cold, calculating assessment, like a chess player evaluating a pawn that had inexplicably taken a knight. "And my sister, Brenna, is a constituent. A decorated, 20-year veteran. You have her in a cell like a common criminal. It is an outrage. She committed a federal crime, Councilman," Martinez said, his voice hard as the metal table. "We have the audio, and we now have corroborating witness video from another passenger." "You have a recording made illegally by a minor without consent," Higgins shot back, his eyes narrowing. He turned to one of his lawyers, a man with a pinched face and glasses. "Florida is a two-party consent state for audio recording, is it not?" "It is, sir," the lawyer chirped, his head bobbing. "That recording is inadmissible in state court, and frankly, obtaining it violated the privacy rights of the crew. We have a strong case for dismissal and a countersuit for defamation and illegal surveillance against the boy and his family." Lucas felt his stomach drop to his shoes. They were going to twist it. They had immense power and they were going to use it to make him the bad guy, the criminal, for having the audacity to catch them. Higgins leaned down, placing his manicured hands flat on the metal table, invading Lucas's personal space. His perfect smile was now a patronizing, predatory smirk. "Son, listen to me," he said, his voice a silky, fake concerned whisper. "You're young. You made a mistake. You got confused about the rules, you got scared, and you tried to use your little phone to get a hardworking woman in trouble. It happens. Young people get emotional. Now, if you sign a statement admitting that you misunderstood the situation, that you were perhaps a bit emotional after a misunderstanding, we can make all of this go away. The charges against my sister will be dropped, your name will be kept out of the papers, and I'll even pay for your flight to Denver." A real first-class ticket, not an upgrade. How does that sound? He slid a pre-typed statement across the table. Don't answer him, Lucas, Martinez warned, his voice a sharp crack of command. I'm trying to help him, Higgins shouted, the friendly mask dropping and revealing the snarling politician beneath. Because if this goes to the press the way you want it to, Agent, I will destroy this kid. I will paint him as a delinquent. I will paint him as a security risk. A troublemaker who hates authority and likes to trap hardworking people. Do you want that attached to your name, Lucas? Do you want every flight school in the country to Google your name and see, potential security threat? Because I can make that happen. I have friends in the media. Lucas trembled. The threat was not a vague one. It was specific, surgical, and terrifying. It attacked the one thing he cared about more than anything, his future in aviation. I didn't misunderstand, Lucas stammered, forcing the words out past the lump in his throat. She called me a thug. She took my things. She used a colloquialism. Higgins waved his hand dismissively, as if shooing a fly. She was stressed. Do you know how hard flight attendants work? Do you know the pressure they are under? And you, a 14-year-old boy, think you can ruin a 20-year career because your feelings got hurt at 30,000 feet? That is enough. Martinez stepped firmly between Higgins and Lucas, using his body as a shield. Councilman, get out. This is a federal interview. If you intimidate this witness one more time, I will add obstruction of justice to the charge sheet, and I do not care who your golf buddies are or what committees you sit on. Higgins straightened his tie, a slow, deliberate gesture of contempt. He stared at Martinez with pure, undiluted venom. You're playing a dangerous game, Jose. You're a mid-level bureaucrat, a cog in a machine. I run this city. I am this city. He then looked at Lucas one last time, his eyes as cold as a reptile's. Smart kids know when to fold, son. Be smart. Don't let this bureaucrat ruin your life to make a name for himself. He turned and marched out, his legal team trailing behind him like a pair of dutiful ducklings. The door clicked shut, and the oppressive silence returned. Martinez exhaled a long, slow breath, his shoulders sagging slightly. For the first time, he looked worried. Is he right? Lucas asked, his voice barely a whisper. Can he ruin my record? Can he keep me from flying? Martinez sat down, his face grim. He can try, he admitted. He's going to go to the media. He's going to try to spin this, to make you the villain. We need to be ready. Martinez was right. Within an hour, the narrative began to shift. On the airport TV in the waiting area, a local news channel was running a breaking news banner. Chaos in the skies. Veteran flight attendant detained after altercation with unruly teen. The anchor, a woman with stiff blonde hair, was reading a statement directly from Councilman Higgins' office. Brenna Higgins, a decorated flight attendant with a spotless 20-year record, was taken into custody today after a misunderstanding with a minor passenger who allegedly refused to follow basic safety instructions. Sources close to the investigation say the passenger, a minor traveling alone, was recording the crew surreptitiously, a violation of airline policy and state law. They didn't mention the racial slurs. They didn't mention the thug comment. They didn't mention the overtime pay conspiracy. They had completely flipped the script, painting Lucas as a tech-savvy brat who wouldn't turn off his phone. Lucas watched the screen, tears of anger and frustration streaming silently down his face. They're lying, he said, his voice hollow. They're all lying, and everyone believes them. Not everyone, Martinez said, a sudden light igniting in his eyes as he checked his phone. Remember the man in 3B, Mr. Sterling, whose full name turned out to be Richard Sterling, the CEO of a major tech logistics company, was not the kind of man who let bullies win or lies go uncorrected. He had spent the last 2 hours in the airport lounge not drowning his frustrations in champagne, but editing a video. He hadn't just watched the incident with his own eyes. He had been on a video call with his business partner when the commotion started. His slim laptop, sitting open on his tray table, had a wide-angle camera that had captured the entire scene in crisp, high definition. It captured Chad snatching the water from Lucas's hand. It captured Brenna's face, clear as day, as she whispered her venomous threats, the audio picked up by the laptop's sensitive microphone. It captured the businessman defending Lucas and the captain's tired, biased reaction. Sterling didn't go to the police. He knew that would be a bureaucratic dead end controlled by people like Higgins. He didn't send it to a news tip line. They were already broadcasting Higgins' propaganda. He went straight to the source. He went to Twitter, now X, and TikTok. He uploaded the video himself, syncing the clear audio of his laptop with the wider video, and wrote a simple, devastating caption: I was in seat 3B on flight 402. This is what really happened. This crew needs to be fired and arrested. The kid is a hero who was under attack. At American Eagle at FANU's #flight 402 #justice for Lucas. Because Sterling had 50,000 followers in the tech and venture capital world, the video didn't crawl. It sprinted. It ignited like a trail of gasoline. In 10 minutes, it had 5,000 views. In 30 minutes, it had 100,000. The comments were a firestorm of righteous fury. In 1 hour, it exploded past 2 million views and was the #1 trending topic in the United States. By the time Lucas and Martinez walked out of the interrogation room, the world had been fundamentally changed. Martinez's phone started buzzing incessantly like a vibrating hive. "Lucas," he said, a wide, genuine smile breaking through his worry for the first time. He showed him the screen. Look, the video was everywhere, but it wasn't just the video. It was the comments. They were a tidal wave of public vindication. That flight attendant is a monster. Look at how she talks to him and discredits a witness. The kid was so polite. He just wanted his water. His dad paid for that seat. I know that flight attendant. Her name is Brenna Higgins. She was rude to my grandmother last year and made her cry. The spotless record Councilman Higgins had bragged about was unraveling in real time. People were replying to the thread with their own horror stories about Brenna, a flood of previously silenced voices. At TravelGirl99 wrote, "OMG, that's Brenna. She kicked me off a flight in 2022 because my baby was crying. She said I was a bad mother and that I should control my child. She's evil." A user named @PilatDave, claiming to be a pilot for a partner airline, wrote, "I flew with Chad Wilson once years ago. Laziest, most arrogant FAA I've ever met. Not surprised at all that he lied to the captain. The internet detectives were working faster than the FBI could issue a warrant. They found photos of Brenna at her brother's lavish fundraisers, linking the nepotism. They found Chad's public Instagram, where he had bragged in old posts about easy shifts and messing with annoying passengers. The evidence of a pattern of toxic, arrogant behavior was overwhelming. Then, the major news networks, smelling blood in the water, picked it up. CNN ran a segment titled, "Viral Video Contradicts Official Narrative in Miami Airport Incident." They played Lucas's audio recording side by side with Sterling's crystal clear video. The synchronization was utterly damning. You could see Brenna smiling a wicked smile in the galley while her grainy voice on the audio conspired to fake a security threat for overtime pay. Back in the councilman's office, the mood had shifted from arrogant confidence to sheer, unadulterated panic. The walls were closing in. Robert Higgins, still in his perfectly tailored suit, was screaming into his phone, his face the color of a ripe tomato. "Kill the story. Tell the station manager I'll pull the entire city advertising budget. What do you mean it's on TikTok? I don't care about TikTok. Buy it, delete it, get the CEO on the phone, I don't care what it costs." But he was learning a harsh lesson that so many before him had learned: you can't delete the internet. The truth was out, and the truth had wings. At the airport, Martinez received a call. He listened intently, his expression shifting from focus to a deep, professional satisfaction. He nodded, said a few quiet words, and hung up. "Lucas," he said, turning to the boy with a smile that was finally full and warm. That was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Florida. They have seen the Sterling video and reviewed the evidence. They aren't just charging Brenna and Chad with interference with a flight crew. They are adding a charge of conspiracy to deprive civil rights under the color of law. It's a hate crime enhancement. What does that mean? Lucas asked, still processing. It means, Martinez said, his voice grave but triumphant, because they used their authority as a flight crew, a federal position of trust, to target you specifically based on your race and to conspire to use law enforcement as a weapon against you. They are looking at serious federal prison time. Not a fine, not a suspension. Prison. And the councilman? Lucas asked, a spark of fierce hope in his voice. The councilman just lost all his leverage, Martinez said. In fact, I think he's about to have a very bad press conference. The FBI has notified me they are opening a separate public corruption probe into his office. Just then, Lucas's phone, which he had been clutching for hours, finally rang. It was his dad, Lucas. David's voice was frantic, then relieved in a wave that Lucas could hear as a physical sob. "Lucas, are you okay? I'm at the airport. I'm at the ticket counter. The police wouldn't let me back. They're telling me, people are shaking my hand and calling you a hero." "What is happening?" Lucas smiled, a wet, shaky, but genuine smile. The suffocating weight on his chest finally lifted, allowing him to breathe freely for the first time in hours. "I'm okay, Dad. I'm with Agent Martinez. I think we won, but the karma wasn't done yet. The legal system moves like a glacier, but the corporate world moves with the speed of a stock ticker." The CEO of American Eagle Airways, watching his company's reputation being annihilated in real time, issued a public statement just as Lucas met his dad at the security exit. David wrapped him in a suffocating bear hug, his grease-stained work shirt smelling like home and safety. "We are horrified by the actions of the crew on Flight 402. The employment of Brenna Higgins and Chad Wilson has been terminated, effective immediately. We are launching a full internal audit of our hiring and training practices. Furthermore, we would like to offer Mr. Lucas Jackson a full scholarship to the flight school of his choice, as well as 10,000 lifetime frequent flyer miles, to ensure he returns to the skies where he belongs and can continue to pursue his dream. Lucas hugged his dad harder, burying his face in his father's shoulder. I did it, Dad. I didn't let them win. They tried to make me small, but I didn't let them. You sure didn't, David said, his voice choked with fierce pride, holding him tight. But the story had one final, explosive twist. The councilman wasn't going down without the dirtiest of fights. He decided to hold an emergency press conference that very evening, intending to brazen it out. He planned to stand before the cameras, play the victim, blame the airlines, poor training, blame the mob justice of social media, blame everyone but his sister. He saw it as his only shot at political survival. He didn't know that Agent Martinez had one more piece of evidence. Something he had found deep in Brenna's confiscated phone, a smoking gun that would finish the job. The City Hall press briefing room was packed wall to wall with reporters and cameras. Councilman Robert Higgins stood behind a podium that bristled with microphones from every major network. He had changed into a somber dark suit and looked every inch a statesman. An American flag pin was affixed to his lapel, a carefully practiced furrow of sympathy was placed on his brow, and his hands gripped the wood of the podium with a show of humble gravity. My fellow citizens, Higgins began, his voice a smooth, silky baritone that filled the hushed room. Today, my family has been the victim of a vicious rush to judgment, fueled by social media hysteria and a reckless federal agent. My sister, Brenna, a dedicated servant of the skies for 2 decades, was placed in an impossible situation with a non-compliant passenger. We believe that once the full context is revealed, and not just a selectively edited internet video, it will be clear that she was following standard safety protocols. The Department of Transportation's aggressive and political actions today are nothing short of a witch hunt. He paused for effect, letting the flashbulbs pop. He was doing it, he was controlling the narrative, he was winning. At the back of the room, Agent Martinez stood next to a U.S. Marshal. He held his phone, watching the live stream of the speech that was happening 50 feet away. He's good, the Marshal whispered. He almost sounds like he believes his own lies. He won't believe this, Martinez said quietly. He tapped a single button on his phone. Martinez hadn't just confiscated Brenna's phone for her contacts. His team had imaged the entire drive, and deep in the deleted folder of her messaging app, messages she had frantically tried to scrub while sitting in the holding cell, was a damning conversation, timestamped to the exact moment the plane was taxiing before it was ordered to stop. It wasn't just Brenna venting. She had been texting in real time with her brother. Martinez nodded to a reporter in the front row, an investigative journalist named Sarah Jenkins, whom he had briefed just 5 minutes ago. She was a pit bull. Jenkins raised her hand. Councilman Higgins. Yes, Ms. Jenkins, Higgins said, pointing to her with a benevolent, confident smile. Councilman, you have stated repeatedly that you were unaware of the incident until after the arrest. Is that correct? Absolutely, Higgins lied smoothly, without a millisecond of hesitation. I learned of it when the station manager called me. I had no prior knowledge whatsoever. Jenkins looked down at her phone, her expression hardening into a look of pure journalistic kill. Then, Councilman, she said, her voice ringing out like a bell in the silent room, can you explain a text message sent from your personal cell phone number to Brenna Higgins at 2:14 p.m. today, a full 30 minutes before the arrest? The message reads, if he's a problem, kick him off. Use the security threat excuse. It always works. I'll make sure the police report disappears. Just don't delay the flight. I have donors flying in on it. The room went deathly silent. You could have heard a pin drop. It was the silence of a political career being executed in real time. Higgins froze. His perfectly sculpted smile melted off his face, leaving a slack, gray, and sickly expression of pure horror. His mouth opened, then closed. No sound came out. I don't know what you're referring to, Higgins stammered, sweat instantly beading on his forehead and upper lip, glistening under the hot camera lights. That is a fabrication. We have the screenshot, Councilman, recovered from your sister's phone and verified by federal investigators, Jenkins pressed, holding up her tablet for all the cameras to see. Did you, Robert Higgins, conspire to falsify a federal police report to protect your sister's schedule and your own political convenience? The press pool erupted. The room became a cacophony of shouted questions. Councilman, did you order the removal of a child? Councilman, are you obstructing a federal investigation? Councilman, will you resign? Higgins backed away from the podium as if it were on fire. This press conference is over. No further questions, he shouted, his voice cracking into a terrified squeak. He turned to flee through the side door, but the door opened before he could reach it. Agent Martinez stepped through the doorway, flanked by 2 stone-faced FBI agents in windbreakers. Robert Higgins, Martinez said, his voice calm but perfectly cutting through the chaos of the shouting reporters like a hot knife through butter. Please stop right there. Higgins stopped dead, trapped between the podium and the law. He looked at the cameras, then at Martinez, then, with dawning horror, at the handcuffs dangling from the FBI agent's belt. You can't do this here, Higgins hissed, his eyes wild. I'm a city councilman. I have immunity. Not anymore, Martinez said, his voice flat and final. You are a suspect in a federal conspiracy case. We have the texts, Robert. We have the phone records. You, a public official, authorized the false reporting of a federal crime against a child to protect your sister's employment and your own political donors. As the FBI agents moved in, the cameras zoomed in, the flashbulbs creating a blinding strobe. The image of the once untouchable Robert Higgins being spun around and handcuffed on live television was beamed into living rooms across Miami. And it was beamed into the waiting area of Concourse D, where Lucas, sitting next to his dad, watched it all on a large screen TV. David had his arm around his son. He knew, Lucas whispered, watching the screen with wide eyes. He told her to do it. He was the one who gave her the idea. And he got caught, David said, a fierce, protective pride burning in his voice as he squeezed his son's shoulder. They all got caught, son. The karma wasn't just hitting. It was an avalanche, burying them all. Within hours, the governor of Florida announced the immediate suspension of Councilman Higgins. The law firm representing the airline, facing its own PR disaster, dropped Brenna as a client, citing moral and ethical repulsion. Chad, who had been trying to cut a plea deal by blaming Brenna entirely, found out that his own private texts, in which he mocked passengers with other friends, had been leaked by a former friend smelling blood in the water. His credibility was destroyed. The power that Brenna thought she had, the family connections, the seniority, the ability to bully without consequence, had evaporated in less than a day. She sat alone in a federal detention center, a woman who had ruined her own life with her own cruelty. And for the first time in her life, no one was coming to bail her out. 6 months later, the federal courthouse in Miami was quiet. The sensationalism of the media circus had faded, leaving only the cold, hard reality of the law. The dignity of the court had replaced the chaos of the internet. Lucas sat in the front row, wearing a new, perfectly fitted suit. His dad sat next to him, holding his hand with a grip that was both strong and trembling. Judge Alicia Thorne, a stern woman with a reputation for zero tolerance for abuses of power, looked down from the bench. She didn't look amused. Brenna Higgins, the judge said, her voice echoing in the silent chamber, you abused a position of authority and public trust. You used racial bias to weaponize federal law enforcement against a child. You conspired to ruin his future for your own convenience and financial gain, and you attempted to cover it up with the help of a corrupt public official. This court finds absolutely no leniency appropriate. Brenna stood in an orange jumpsuit, weeping silently. She looked older, frailer. The arrogance, the smug smirk, the predatory gleam in her eyes were all gone, replaced by the hollow, shell-shocked look of someone who had lost everything and finally understood it was entirely her own doing. I sentence you to 36 months in a federal penitentiary, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are permanently and irrevocably banned from employment in the aviation industry. Chad Wilson received 18 months. Robert Higgins, who had pled guilty to a lesser corruption charge to avoid a 20-year sentence, was already serving 5 years in a minimum security facility in Pensacola, his political career nothing but ashes. As the gavel banged with a final, echoing crack, Lucas didn't feel a surge of joy or the heat of vengeance. He just felt a profound, calming peace. The monster under the bed was gone. The people who had tried so hard to make him feel small and worthless were now, irrevocably, smaller than he would ever be. Lucas walked out of the courthouse and into the bright, cleansing Florida sunshine. Agent Martinez, now a friend, was waiting for him by the marble steps. You did good, kid, Martinez said, shaking Lucas's hand firmly. Most adults wouldn't have handled that as well as you did. You kept your head when everyone around you was losing theirs. I just wanted to go to the summit, Lucas smiled, a broad, easy grin. Speaking of which, Martinez said, a twinkle in his eye as he handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. I think you have a flight to catch. Inside the envelope was a ticket. But it wasn't for a commercial airliner. It was a charter ticket. Mr. Sterling, the guy from Seat 3B, Martinez explained. He called me. He owns a Gulfstream G650. Lucas's jaw dropped. A Gulfstream G650, the Rolls-Royce of the skies, a $50 million marvel of engineering. Are you serious? Dead serious, Martinez grinned. He's flying to Denver for a business meeting. He wants to know if you and your dad want a lift. He says the co-pilot seat is open. He heard you're a pretty good virtual pilot. The G650 climbed out of Miami like a homesick angel, its twin engines purring with effortless power as it soared far above the commercial lanes. The ride was smooth as glass. Lucas sat in the cockpit jump seat, a special observer's chair, a high-tech headset over his ears, his eyes white as dinner plates. The captain, a former Air Force fighter pilot named Captain Reynolds, with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes, turned to him. "You ever flown one of these, Lucas?" he asked, his voice crackling through the headset. "Only on Microsoft Flight Simulator, sir," Lucas said, his voice full of awe as his eyes scanned the state-of-the-art digital avionics suite. "Well," Reynolds said, a mischievous smile spreading across his face as he disengaged the autopilot. "Simulators are great, but nothing beats the real thing. Your aircraft, Lucas." Lucas hesitated. "Mine, yours," the captain confirmed with a nod. "Put your hands on the yoke. Gentle, now, just feel the airplane. She's alive." Lucas reached out. He felt the soft vibration of the control column, the subtle hum of the immense power at his fingertips, the silken feel of the air moving over the wings. He looked out the panoramic cockpit window at the curved blue horizon, where the sky met the darkness of space. He wasn't the boy in seat 3A anymore. He wasn't the thug Brenna had tried to paint him as. He wasn't a victim. He was a pilot. He was flying. He banked the plane gently to the left with the lightest touch, watching the entire world tilt gracefully on his command, the clouds spiraling below. Back in the luxurious cabin, David watched his son through the open cockpit door, a crystal glass of real champagne in his hand, served by a flight attendant who had treated them both like royalty from the moment they stepped aboard. A single, silent tear of pure pride traced a path down his cheek. They had tried to ground his boy. They had tried to clip his wings before he could even learn to use them. But all they had done was clear the runway for him to take off. Lucas glanced at the altimeter. 45,000 feet. He was higher, both literally and figuratively, than their prejudice or their cruelty could ever reach. Lucas Jackson didn't just win a lawsuit. He didn't just bring down a corrupt politician. He won his future, taking the yoke in his own hands and soaring into it. And the crew of Flight 402 learned the hard way that when you try to bury the truth, you are sometimes just digging your own grave. It's a powerful reminder. Never underestimate someone just because of how they look, how young they are, or where they sit. You never know who's watching, or who they might become. If you enjoyed this story of justice served cold and soaring high, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories where the underdog bites back and karma delivers the final, devastating blow, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were the hero in seat 3B? I'll see you in the next. The trouble didn't start the moment Karen Devereaux slapped the casserole out of Nia's hands. It started the moment Nia walked through the church doors, holding that dish like a peace offering, hoping that tonight, just tonight, things would be different. Spoiler alert, they weren't. The First Baptist Fellowship Hall of Millbrook was a monument to Southern hospitality, all gleaming hardwood floors, the scent of lemon polish, and the soft hum of 100 polite conversations. For most of the congregation, the annual ministry potluck was the highlight of the social calendar, a time to show off new recipes and share wholesome fellowship. But for 16-year-old Nia Coleman, it was a battlefield she had been drafted into without her consent. And her enemy was not a stranger. It was a woman with frosted blonde hair, a string of real pearls, and a heart that Nia was convinced was a block of solid, frozen ice. Her name was Karen Devereaux, and she was the chairwoman of the women's ministry and the undisputed social queen of the church. Nia wasn't a member of the Devereaux social circle. She was the daughter of Patricia Coleman, a single mother who cleaned houses for a living, including, as fate would cruelly have it, Karen Devereaux's immaculate colonial mansion. Nia knew every stain on Karen's Persian rugs, every streak on her stainless steel appliances, because she often helped her mother after school, holding the bucket while Patricia scrubbed on her hands and knees. They were invisible, part of the background machinery that made Karen's life sparkle. But tonight, in the fellowship hall, Nia was suddenly, horribly visible. She clutched the glass baking dish tightly, the warmth of the macaroni and cheese seeping through the pot holders. It was her grandmother's recipe, a sacred text passed down through 3 generations. The top was a perfect golden brown crust of sharp cheddar and buttered breadcrumbs, the inside a creamy, decadent blend of 5 cheeses. It wasn't just food, it was her soul on a plate, a dish made with love to offer as a gesture of goodwill. Patricia, knowing how unkind the church ladies could be, had encouraged her. "You kill them with kindness, baby," she had whispered, straightening the collar on Nia's simple but beautiful yellow dress. "Let your light shine." Nia walked toward the long buffet table, which was already groaning under the weight of crystal bowls and silver platters. She found an empty spot near the center and was about to set her dish down when a hand closed around her wrist. The grip was surprisingly strong, the manicured nails painted a demure shell pink. "Not there," a voice said, sharp and low. Nia looked up into the cold blue eyes of Karen Devereaux. Up close, Karen's makeup was flawless, her hair a meticulously sculpted helmet. She smelled of expensive perfume, a scent Nia recognized from cleaning her bathroom. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice barely a whisper. "That spot is for Mrs. Henderson's award-winning ambrosia salad," Karen said, her smile not reaching her eyes. It was a smile of pure social malice. "The main table is for established members of the ministry. Why don't you put your casserole over on the visitors' table in the corner, next to the paper plates?" She gestured with a flutter of her bejeweled fingers to a small, rickety card table pushed against the far wall, a designated island for misfit dishes and potluck pariahs. A few women standing nearby, ladies in floral dresses who orbited Karen like moons around a planet, tittered with quiet laughter. Nia felt the familiar heat of humiliation flooding her cheeks. "It's macaroni and cheese," Nia said, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's my grandmother's recipe. I just thought." "Sweetie," Karen interrupted, her voice now dripping with practiced, patronizing condescension, "we all think our family recipes are special. But we have a standard of presentation here, and store-bought cheese just doesn't cut it on the main table. We can smell the Velveeta from here." The insult was a scalpel, precise and deep. Nia's grandmother's recipe used hand-grated Gruyere, sharp white cheddar, and Fontina. There wasn't a molecule of processed cheese in it. But before Nia could open her mouth to defend herself, a new voice cut through the chatter. "Karen, for goodness sake, leave the girl alone. It's just a side dish, not a health inspection." The speaker was an elderly woman with a halo of white hair and a magenta pantsuit that was unapologetically bold. She leaned heavily on a cane topped with a brass duck's head. This was Mrs. Agnes Butterfield, the 83-year-old widow of the church's founding pastor. She was worth millions, had a tongue sharper than a serpent's tooth, and answered to absolutely no one. Karen's smile became brittle. "Agnes, I'm just trying to keep things organized. You know how chaotic it gets. It looks from here like you're organizing a public humiliation," Agnes snapped, her voice loud enough to carry. "Let the girl put her food down and go sit with her mama." Karen's face flushed a patchy, unbecoming red, clashing with her pearls. For a moment, the mask of civility completely slipped, revealing the naked, ugly bully beneath. She looked from Agnes to Nia, and in that split second, Nia saw a decision being made. Karen would not be shown up. She would not lose face. She would reclaim her dominance. "You know what," Karen said, her voice suddenly high and theatrical. "If this is the kind of food we're allowing, I just don't think it's sanitary." And with a single, swift motion, she reached out and slapped the bottom of the glass dish in Nia's hands. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate, violent shove. The heavy Pyrex dish flew out of Nia's grasp, flipping through the air before smashing onto the gleaming hardwood floor with a sound like a bomb going off. A geyser of creamy cheese sauce, broken glass, and buttered breadcrumbs exploded outwards, splattering the hem of Karen's designer dress, ruining a nearby display of silk flowers, and creating a massive, smoking crater of culinary devastation in the middle of the spotless floor. The entire fellowship hall went dead silent. 200 people stopped mid-conversation, their heads swiveling toward the source of the commotion. Nia stood frozen, her hands still outstretched in the shape of holding the now destroyed dish. She was covered in tiny flecks of cheese, her beautiful yellow dress now a Jackson Pollock painting of grease and cream. The symbolism was not lost on her. Her offering, her soul on a plate, was a pile of shattered glass and trampled noodles on the floor. Karen Devereaux looked down at the mess, then at Nia. And then, with the most breathtakingly brazen piece of acting Nia had ever seen, Karen stumbled back, clutching her chest, and let out a gasping shriek. "How dare you!" Karen screamed, her voice echoing off the rafters. "She threw her food at me. A child assaulting the women's ministry chairwoman. Call the police. I want her arrested." Nia's brain couldn't process the lie fast enough. I didn't," she stammered. "She's a menace. She's always been trouble, just like her mother. Look at my dress. This is a $1,200 street. John knit. It's ruined. Assault." Karen was wailing, working the crowd like a televangelist. The women around her, some believers, some just cowards, rushed to console her, shooting venomous glances at Nia. A large deacon named Frank, a retired security guard and a loyal foot soldier in Karen's social army, began lumbering toward Nia, his face a mask of righteous anger. Nia felt the world closing in. But she wasn't looking at Karen or Deacon Frank. She was looking past them, at the crowd of 200 witnesses, most of whom had been chatting and not watching the altercation. They had only turned at the crash. They only saw Karen screaming about an assault. Nia saw a sea of faces ready to believe the white woman in the expensive dress over the black girl covered in her own destroyed food. She was on the verge of hyperventilating, but she forced herself to breathe. Document everything, she thought, remembering a podcast she had listened to about citizen journalism. The truth is your only shield. She slowly, casually, reached into the pocket of her dress and unlocked her phone. She had been texting her best friend, Maya. The camera app was one swipe away. She had missed the video of the slap itself, but she started recording audio just as Deacon Frank reached her. Come with me, Missy, Deacon Frank grunted, his meaty hand reaching for her arm. We're putting you in the nursery until the police get here. You're in a world of trouble. I'm not going anywhere, Nia said, her voice shaking but clear. I didn't do anything wrong. She hid my dish. She assaulted me. There are 200 people here. Someone had to have seen it. I saw it, a clear voice rang out. It was Mrs. Agnes Butterfield, still leaning on her cane. She was standing her ground at the epicenter of the mess, her sensible shoes planted right next to a shard of broken glass. I saw the whole, rotten thing. Karen Devereaux slapped that dish out of that sweet girl's hands like she was spiking a football. It was a vicious, unprovoked act of cruelty. A murmur rippled through the crowd. A competing narrative had been launched. Karen's head whipped around, her eyes blazing with fury. Agnes is old and confused. She doesn't know what she saw. Her eyesight is terrible. My eyesight is perfect. You overpainted weasel, Agnes fired back, banging her cane on the floor for emphasis and sending a small piece of glass skittering. And my mind is sharper than yours will ever be. The two powerful women stood at an impasse. But in a church, power isn't just about money. It's about perceived moral authority. And Deacon Frank had already placed his bet. I'm sorry, Mrs. Butterfield, he said, though he didn't sound sorry at all. But I have to act on the complaint of the ministry head. The girl is coming with me. He grabbed Nia's arm, his fingers digging into her bicep painfully. Let go of me, Nia said, a surge of adrenaline clearing her head. She wasn't just scared anymore. She was angry, and she realized, with sudden, absolute clarity, that she had a weapon Karen didn't know about. A silent, digital witness. Nia let herself be roughly frog-marched out of the fellowship hall, past the stairs of the congregation, past the ruined macaroni and cheese, and into the musty, quiet nursery filled with plastic toys and the scent of baby powder. Deacon Frank slammed the door shut. She could hear a chair being wedged under the doorknob from the outside. She was locked in, but she was also alone. She pulled out her phone and stopped the audio recording. She had captured everything. Deacon Frank's rough handling, Karen's shrill accusations, and, most importantly, Mrs. Butterfield's eyewitness testimony. But she knew that in a town like Millbrook, the word of an elderly woman, however rich, might not be enough against the political machine Karen could mobilize. She needed more. She needed to force the hand of justice. With trembling fingers, she opened Facebook, not her main account which was private, but the public, Millbrook Community Watch page. It was a cesspool of lost dog notices and petty complaints, curated by bored townies. She also opened the Millbrook First Baptist group, a private group, but one that was leaking screenshots like a sieve to the outside world. She didn't post the audio. Not yet. Audio could be dismissed as a deepfake by Karen's allies. She needed an ally of her own. She typed out a message, not to the public, but to the one person she knew might be able to help. Nia opened her email and began composing a message to the state director of the Southern Baptist Convention's Ethics and Integrity Committee, a man named Pastor David Okonkwo. He was a high-profile, reform-minded leader who had made a name for himself rooting out corruption and abuse in local churches. Nia's own pastor, Pastor Tim, was a weak man completely under Karen's thumb. Nia knew going to him would be pointless. She had to go above his head. She attached the audio file and wrote a summary of the events, including the destruction of her property, the racial undertones of the Velveeta comment, and her unlawful detention in the church nursery. She hit send, praying the email wouldn't get lost in a spam filter. Meanwhile, in the fellowship hall, the potluck was in shambles. The food was being awkwardly eaten around the yellow caution tape that Deacon Frank had strung up around the crime scene. Karen Devereaux was holding court at the head of the dessert table, a cold compress held dramatically to her forehead, regaling a captive audience with her trauma. The poor dear is probably off her medication, Karen whispered to a gaggle of sympathizers. I've seen her snooping around my house when her mother cleans. She has a deep, jealous hatred for me. I might have to file a restraining order for my safety. The only person who wasn't rattled was Mrs. Agnes Butterfield. She sat in a folding chair by the broken glass, refusing to move, like a tiny, magenta-clad guardian of the truth. She had her own phone out. She wasn't emailing a pastor. Agnes Butterfield was on Twitter. And Agnes, under the anonymous handle at Brassduckcane, had been a secret, savage political pundit for years, with a small but fiercely loyal following of 10,000 followers. Her tweet was short, sharp, and sent a shockwave through the sleepy Millbrook online community. Just watch the church matriarch assault a black teenager with a casserole dish and then cry victim. I'm an eyewitness. The cops have been called on the child. Disgraceful. Hashtag Millbrook, hashtag justice for Nia, hashtag church too. The Millbrook police arrived 10 minutes later, a single squad car with a tired-looking officer named Jenkins. He walked into the nursery to find Nia sitting calmly on a rocking chair. Miss, I have a report of an assault. A Karen Devereaux says you threw a hot dish at her, causing injury and property damage. That is a lie, Officer Jenkins, Nia said, her voice calm and polite. Mrs. Devereaux destroyed my property. She slapped my casserole dish, which shattered and cut my arm. Nia held up her forearm, which had a thin, 2-inch slice from a piece of flying glass that she hadn't even noticed until now. A thin trickle of blood had dried on her skin. I'm the one who was assaulted. I also have an eyewitness, Mrs. Agnes Butterfield. Officer Jenkins sighed. A dispute between the richest widow and the most powerful socialite in town was his worst nightmare. Okay, let's all just settle down. Let's go back to the hall and sort this out like adults. He escorted Nia out of the nursery, and the sight of her being walked out by a police officer, even casually, was enough for the rumor mill. Karen's allies instantly began whispering, "They're arresting her." Back in the hall, Karen launched into her performance the moment she saw the officer. "Arrest her, Jenkins. I want to press full charges. Assault and battery, destruction of private property," she shrieked, pointing at her ruined dress. "Karen, quiet down," Jenkins said, rubbing his temples. "Mrs. Butterfield here says you're the aggressor. She's a senile old bat." "Whoa," Agnes said, raising her cane. "Call me senile again, Karen, and you'll need more than a new dress. You'll need a proctologist to remove this cane." "Enough," Jenkins shouted. The room fell silent. He was trapped in a, she said, nightmare, with no security cameras in the old fellowship hall. Seeing his hesitation, Karen's husband, Bill Devereaux, a quiet, wealthy man who usually stayed in the background, stepped forward. He didn't look at Nia. He looked at Officer Jenkins. "Officer, I think you know who the credible party is here," Bill said, his voice a low, threatening monotone. "My wife is a pillar of this community, and I have a direct line to the police commissioner. I'd hate for you to make a career-ending mistake by taking the word of a troubled girl and an elderly woman over my wife's." The threat was unmistakable. The color drained from Officer Jenkins' face. The weight of the small-town power structure pressed down on him. Nia felt a cold dread in her stomach. The fix was in. The entire corrupt ecosystem was aligning to crush her. She was going to be arrested for the crime of being attacked. "All right," Jenkins said, his voice defeated. "Miss Coleman, I have to ask you to." But he never finished the sentence. Because suddenly, every single smartphone in the fellowship hall began buzzing, beeping, and trilling at once. It was a cacophony of digital noise. 200 people simultaneously looked down at their screens. Karen paused her dramatic weeping. Bill unclenched his jaw. Officer Jenkins looked confused. A young girl from the youth group, who had been eating pie in the corner, held up her phone and gasped, "Oh my God. Someone posted a video. It's all over Facebook." The color that had drained from Officer Jenkins' face now drained from Karen's. "What video?" she demanded, her voice sharp. "There was no video. I had my back to the room. But there was a video. Not of Karen slapping the dish. Nia's audio was the proof of the aftermath. No, this video was worse for Karen. Much, much worse. A teenage boy, a quiet, lanky kid named Tyler who sat in the back pew with his family every Sunday, had been doing exactly what he wasn't supposed to be doing. He had snuck into the balcony to get a cool time-lapse of the potluck setup for his school film project. His GoPro, set up on the railing, was running the entire time. It captured a perfect, silent, high-definition, wide-angle view of the entire buffet table. The video was now streaming live on the Millbrook Community Watch page, having been posted by Tyler's father, who was furious at what he had witnessed in silence. The video was damning and beautiful in its clarity. It showed Nia walking up with her dish, her body language polite and timid. It showed Karen Devereaux stepping into her path with aggressive posture. It showed the 2-second argument. And then, with the cold, cruel calculation of a true bully, it showed Karen Devereaux winding up and slapping the bottom of the dish with a vicious, intentional swing, sending the glass flying, and then immediately staggering backward and beginning her theatrical screaming of assault. The lie was exposed in cinematic glory. The silence in the fellowship hall was suddenly broken by the sound of the video on a dozen phones. Karen's scream of, "How dare you!" looped tinily across the room. Then, the unmistakable visual of the slap, clear as day. Karen Devereaux's face went through a rapid, terrifying metamorphosis. From shock, to disbelief, to a white-hot, unadulterated panic. That's out of context. She sputtered, her voice cracking. "It's edited. It's an AI. That boy is a troublemaker. He's in cahoots with the girl." But no one was listening to her anymore. The spell was broken. The congregation who had been ready to side with her just moments before now stared at her with a mixture of horror, disgust, and utter contempt. Deacon Frank, who had physically manhandled Nia, was now looking at his own hands as if they were covered in slime. He took a shuffling step away from Karen, trying to distance himself from the exploding disaster. Officer Jenkins watched the video on the youth group girl's phone. He then looked up at Karen Devereaux, his tired expression replaced with a look of cold fury. He had been about to arrest an innocent, injured teenage girl because this woman had lied to his face. He reached down and clicked the button on his body camera, ensuring his next words were on the permanent record. "Karen Devereaux," he said, his voice now made of iron. "Put your hands behind your back. You are under arrest for filing a false police report, assault, and battery of a minor, and attempted malicious prosecution." "What? No," Karen screamed, her composure completely and utterly shattered. She stumbled backward, colliding with the dessert table. A massive, ornate red velvet cake baked by someone else, of course, wobbled, tipped, and crashed directly onto her head, coating her perfect blonde frosted helmet in a thick layer of cream cheese icing and red cake crumbs. The absurd, poetic justice of the moment was surreal. The cake crown settled on her head as the handcuffs clicked around her wrists. It was the image that would be seen around the world. Mrs. Agnes Butterfield, still standing her ground, let out a loud, victorious crack of laughter that echoed through the silent hall. "That's the best potluck I've been to in 80 years. She cackled. Nia stood, watching Karen being led away, her face a mess of smeared makeup, ruined cake, and uncontrolled weeping. "It was just a casserole. I'm the victim here. Bill, do something," Karen wailed as she was placed in the back of the patrol car, a culinary and moral disaster on wheels. But there was nothing Bill could do. The video was viral. The CEO of a national news network had just retweeted it. The damage wasn't just done, it was a crater. But the devout, ruthless Karen, even in her darkest hour, forgot one of the most fundamental tenets of her own faith: the thing done in secret shall be shouted from the rooftops. Nia's email to Pastor David Okonkwo had not landed in a spam filter. The pastor, a man of profound integrity, had seen the video just as he was boarding a plane. Infuriated, he had used his layover to launch an immediate investigation. He didn't just look at this one incident. He looked at the pattern. And what he found buried in the church's financial records, thanks to a whistleblower in the bookkeeping office who had been too scared of Karen to come forward until now, was a biblical plague of corruption. Karen, as head of the women's ministry, had been skimming from the charity fund for years. The ministry potluck wasn't just a party. It was a cover for her to launder misappropriated funds into her own entertainment budget, which included a brand new Sub-Zero refrigerator in her own home and a retreat to a 5-star resort in the Bahamas. The evidence was a smoking gun. The church board, facing a public revolt and the threat of a full-blown IRS audit, convened an emergency meeting that very night. By 10 p.m., a statement was posted on the church's website. The First Baptist Church of Millbrook has accepted the immediate resignation of Deacon Frank Mills. Furthermore, after a thorough review, the ministry membership of Karen Devereaux has been revoked. She has been excommunicated from our congregation pending a full investigation into financial malfeasance and moral turpitude. We issue our most sincere and humble apologies to Miss Nia Coleman and her family. To honor her, the church has renamed the annual charity fund as the Nia Coleman Grace Under Pressure Foundation and will be fully funding her college scholarship. The next morning, the fallout was complete. Bill Devereaux, his reputation in shambles and his wife's legal fees mounting, announced he was stepping down from his position at the bank and filing for a legal separation. The police commissioner, Bill's direct line, issued a public statement commending Officer Jenkins for his impeccable handling of a difficult situation and denying ever having a close relationship with the Devereaux family. And as for Mrs. Agnes Butterfield, she became an internet folk hero. Her Twitter handle at @BrassDuckCane gained 200,000 followers overnight. T-shirts featuring her quote, "My eyesight is perfect, you overpainted weasel," were selling for $25 a pop, with all the profits being sent to a real charity, the one Nia now helped oversee. A month later, the Millbrook Community Church held a small, private potluck. It was held in the backyard of Mrs. Butterfield's estate, a sprawling garden filled with roses and the scent of jasmine. The guest list was small: Nia, her mother Patricia, Officer Jenkins and his wife, Tyler and his dad, and Agnes. The food was placed on simple wooden tables. Nia had brought her grandmother's macaroni and cheese again, this time baked in a brand new, unbreakable metal dish that Mrs. Butterfield had bought her. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Nia stood at the table, dishing out a perfect square of the golden brown casserole. Agnes Butterfield, sitting in a cushioned wicker chair with her cane resting beside her, took a bite. She closed her eyes, savoring the creamy, sharp, buttery perfection. "Child," Agnes said, opening her eyes and fixing them on Nia. "This isn't just good, this is divine. The Lord is my shepherd, and my shepherd has led me to this macaroni and cheese." Nia laughed, a free, joyful sound that echoed across the garden. The fear was gone. The shame was gone. Karen had tried to shatter her offering, destroy her dignity, and lock her away. But glass shards can be swept away, and the truth, once baked into a perfect, golden crust of public accountability, can feed the souls of an entire community. What Karen Devereaux failed to understand was the ancient law of the potluck. When you bring a dish to the table, you are offering a part of yourself. You are vulnerable, but a true community protects that vulnerability. It nourishes it, and when a bully tries to poison the well, the community must rise up, not just to defend the innocent, but to reclaim the feast. Nia's grandmother's recipe had not just survived. It had become a symbol. The shattered casserole dish was swept away and thrown in the trash bin of history, right next to Karen Devereaux's reputation. Nia raised a glass of sweet tea, looking at the small, mismatched family of people who had chosen justice over convenience. She was no longer the invisible girl holding the bucket. She was the guardian of the table. And she had learned a lesson she would carry for the rest of her life. Never, ever underestimate the power of a teenager with a smartphone, a grandmother's recipe, and the unshakable courage to let her light shine. If you enjoyed that incredible story of a bully getting her just desserts, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments, what's your go-to potluck dish that would make an enemy crumble? We'll see you in the next one. The ugly classist and racist undertones of the accusation were not lost on the crowd, but they were too caught up in the drama to care. The accusation itself was the only thing that mattered. Karpov, seeing an opportunity to reclaim his status, puffed out his chest. A thief. I knew something was off about his play. No one is that calm without having a criminal mind. He was probably distracted, thinking about the money he had stolen. Marcus felt the walls closing in. I didn't take anything. Search my bag. I don't have $10,000. He grabbed his worn-out backpack and emptied its contents onto the chess table. A physics textbook, a notepad, a pencil case, his inhaler, and a half-eaten granola bar. No cash, no hidden loot. Finch didn't miss a beat. Of course he doesn't have it on him. He probably stashed it in the bathroom, or had an accomplice. These inner-city kids always run in packs. I'm calling the police. No one leaves. Professor Williams had been watching this scene unfold with a look of cold, calculating detachment. He had seen witch hunts before. He had seen how power structures devoured the innocent. He caught Marcus's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod, as if to say, stay calm. This is a test. Don't let them see you break. But one of the men in suits beside him, a younger agent with a name tag that read Agent Miller, leaned in and whispered to the professor, "Sir, we should leave. If the local PD gets involved, the director will have a fit. You can't be linked to a petty theft investigation. We need to distance ourselves from the kid." Professor Williams looked at Agent Miller with an expression of profound disappointment. "The kid," he said quietly, "is a national asset. And you want me to leave him to the wolves?" "Sir, it's protocol. It's cowardice," Williams snapped. He turned back to Marcus, but before he could say another word, Finch was already on the phone with the police, his voice a theatrical tremble of false victimhood. "Yes, this is Gerald Finch at the convention center. A robbery, a large sum of cash. The suspect is a 14-year-old male. He's being detained by security." Marcus felt a hand on his shoulder. It was a mall cop, a tired-looking security guard named Hank who had been hired for the event. "All right, kid, come with me," Hank said, not unkindly, but with the firmness of a man who just wanted to finish his shift without incident. "Let's go wait in the manager's office until the real cops get here." Marcus was marched out of the hall. He had won a game of chess against a grandmaster in a stunning, public victory. He had been offered a position at the most prestigious aerospace research institute in the country. And he was now being led away like a common criminal, accused of a theft he did not commit, by a man whose only motive was petty, vindictive jealousy. The back office of the convention center was a cluttered, windowless room that smelled of stale coffee and toner from a giant laser printer. Marcus sat on a plastic chair, his hands clasped in his lap. He was not crying. He was no longer scared. The fear had been burned away by a cold, clarifying rage. He thought about his mother, Lian Chen, a woman who had emigrated from Taiwan with nothing but a degree in electrical engineering that wasn't recognized in the U.S. She worked double shifts at a diner to pay for his chess club fees, his science camp applications, and the high-speed internet he needed for his research. She had poured every ounce of her being into giving him a chance, and this petty little man, Gerald Finch, was trying to destroy it all because his ego was bruised. Marcus had one asset left. Like Lucas on the plane, like Nia in the church, he had a habit of quietly capturing reality. His phone was still in his pocket. The security guard hadn't frisked him. Marcus had been wearing a smartwatch, a gift from his mother, that had a recording function. He had, out of pure, nerdy habit, started a voice memo when Karpov began his game, wanting to analyze the ambient pressure of the room for his own psychological study. The recording was still running, and it had captured something crucial. In the chaos that erupted after the checkmate, when Finch had whispered to Karpov, Marcus had been standing close. The watch had a sensitive microphone. He rewound the recording and played it back, pressing his ear to the speaker. Hiss, chatter, he's a cheat, he must be. How else could a nobody, beat a grandmaster, hit an earpiece? Watch this. Stop, everyone stop, I've been robbed. The recording cut off right before the accusation, but it had something even better. It had the conspiracy. It had Finch deliberately planning to frame him. It was proof of malice, of intent, of a plot. But a voice memo wasn't enough. He needed help. He needed someone with the power to instantly verify an act. Marcus knew that Professor Williams was likely being pulled out of the building that very moment by his security detail, but he had the professor's business card in his pocket. On the back was a direct email address. Marcus, his fingers flying over his phone's screen, composed an email. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He attached the audio file and wrote a message that was a masterclass in clear, concise, scientific reporting. To Professor Williams, from M. Chen, subject, urgent, evidence of malicious prosecution conspiracy. Attached is an audio recording of Gerald Finch and Viktor Karpov moments before the false accusation. It captures Finch stating his intent to frame me for a crime I did not commit. He states, he's a cheat, he must be, and then proceeds to instigate the fake robbery claim. This is a criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice and defame a minor. I am currently being illegally detained in the convention center manager's office. The local police are en route. I am requesting immediate assistance. MC. He hit send, and then, just as a precaution, he opened his email again. His mother had a cousin who worked as a paralegal at a massive civil rights law firm in Chicago. He didn't know her well, but he had her email from a family mailing list. He forwarded the same message to her, adding a single line, "Andy Grace, please help. They're trying to frame me." The local police arrived in the form of two officers. One was a gruff, heavy-set man named Sergeant Kowalski. The other was a younger, thinner officer named Park. Kowalski had the weary, cynical look of a man who had seen every scam in the book. He had been given Finch's statement and had already made up his mind. "All right, kid," Kowalski said, flipping open a notepad. "The guy says he caught you on camera sneaking into the office. Says the 10 grand is gone. Where'd you stash it?" "Sir, I did not steal any money," Marcus said, his voice unnervingly calm for a teenager facing a potential felony charge. "Mr. Finch is lying. He is retaliating against me because I beat his star player in a chess match. I have an audio recording of him planning the false accusation." Kowalski paused, his pen hovering over the paper. "An audio recording?" Marcus carefully placed his phone on the table. "Yes, sir, I can play it for you right now." Kowalski gave Officer Park a sideways glance. They were in a tricky spot. If this kid had evidence, the entire narrative Finch had spun would fall apart. But before Marcus could hit play, the door to the manager's office flew open. It wasn't Professor Williams, it was Gerald Finch himself. He had a face like a gargoyle, twisted with malicious triumph. "Officers," Finch shrieked, pointing at the phone. "Don't listen to him, that phone is stolen property. He probably bought it with the money he stole. He's a computer hacker, anything on there is a fabrication. Digital evidence is inadmissible." He was creating so much noise that Marcus couldn't get a word in. The situation was descending into a chaotic shouting match. Kowalski, overwhelmed and under pressure, slammed his hand on the table. "Enough, kid, turn off the phone. I'm impounding it as evidence. You're coming with us to the station. We'll sort this out with your parents after you've been processed." The handcuffs came out, the cold metal clicked around Marcus's wrists. He was being arrested, for winning a chess game. The sheer, Kafkaesque absurdity of it would have made him laugh if it didn't make him want to scream. He was walked through the service hallway of the convention center, past the kitchen staff who stared in pity, and toward the back-loading dock. Finch followed behind them, keeping his distance but wearing a triumphant, jeering smile. But karma, as it often does, was not lying dormant. It was merely standing at the back door, waiting to make an entrance. The group, Kowalski, Park, Marcus, and Finch, emerged into the cool, gray light of the back alley. The police cruiser was parked next to a dumpster, but blocking the cruiser were 3 black SUVs with government plates. Standing in the middle of the alley, flanked by Agent Miller and another, larger agent, was Professor Marcus Williams. He did not look like a mild-mannered academic anymore. He looked like a 4-star general who had just witnessed an act of insubordination. His arms were crossed, and his expression was carved from granite. "Sergeant," Professor Williams said, his voice cutting through the alley like a blade. "Remove those handcuffs, now." Sergeant Kowalski puffed out his chest. He didn't know who this guy was, but he knew he was a cop. "Sir, this is a police matter. The suspect is under arrest for grand larceny. You need to step aside. I am Professor Marcus Williams, director of the Armstrong Institute, operating under the direct authority of the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency," Williams said, holding up a badge that wasn't a police badge. It was a federal credential with a holographic eagle. "The child you have in chains is a federally designated high-value asset. He has just accepted a position on a classified national security project. And I have clear, undeniable evidence that the man standing behind you, he pointed a finger like a laser beam at Gerald Finch, fabricated this entire accusation in a fit of petty jealousy. Finch's smile shattered like cheap china. What? No, that's absurd. It's a state case. Agent Miller, Williams said, snapping his fingers, the recording, if you please. Agent Miller held up a military-grade tablet. Marcus's email had been received, processed, and analyzed by the NSA's voice recognition software in the 7 minutes since it had been sent. The audio from Marcus's watch, now enhanced and cleaned of static, boomed out of a portable speaker. Finch's own voice, tinny but undeniable, filled the alley. He's a cheat. He must be. How else could a nobody beat a grandmaster? Watch this. Stop. Everyone stop. I've been robbed. The color drained from Gerald Finch's face so completely that he looked like he might faint and crash into the dumpster. He took a stumbling step backward, his hands flying up as if to ward off the sound of his own voice. That's a deepfake. A deepfake. You can't use that. Professor Williams finally allowed himself a thin, cold smile. The Federal Bureau of Investigation's Digital Forensics Lab has already authenticated the file. Its metadata matches the time and location perfectly. It is legally, and irrevocably, a recording of you, Mr. Finch, announcing your intent to frame an innocent child for a crime that didn't happen. You didn't just file a false police report. You committed perjury, obstruction of justice, and, since you did it to a federal asset, you have committed a federal crime. Officer Park, who had been looking more and more uncomfortable, immediately stepped away from Marcus. Sergeant Kowalski, his mind reeling, looked from the federal agents to the trembling, pathetic figure of Gerald Finch. But, the security footage. Kowalski sputtered, his voice weak. Finch said he had security footage of the theft. The convention center's security system has been offline for 6 months for repairs, Professor Williams said, his voice dripping with contempt. They never budget for maintenance, do they, Mr. Finch? As the budget chair of the chess club, you would know that. So you knew the footage was a bluff. You just assumed no one would check in time to stop the arrest. It was a perfect, devastating trap. Finch had lied about the video evidence, not knowing that a federal agency had just done a full digital sweep of the building's systems to ensure the safety of their asset. He was caught in a web of his own fabrication. Sergeant Kowalski, his face burning with the humiliation of being so completely and utterly duped, slowly turned to face Gerald Finch. He took out his own handcuffs. Gerald Finch, he growled, the weariness gone from his voice, replaced by the righteous fury of a cop who hated being made a fool. You are under arrest. But I am the victim. Finch squealed, his voice a high-pitched shriek of panic. The money is missing. The $10,000. A new voice, dry and sarcastic, echoed from inside the loading dock. You mean this $10,000? Everyone turned. Standing in the doorway was the waitress who had been setting up the cheese platters. She was holding a canvas bank deposit bag with the words, Chess Charity, written on it in marker. I found this in the men's bathroom, behind a toilet, she said, her voice filled with disgust. It must have fallen out of your jacket when you were in there rehearsing your big, dramatic speech by the mirror. I heard you practicing it. She looked at Finch with undisguised contempt. You are the worst kind of man. It was a final, absurd, perfect detail. In his panic to set up the frame job, Finch had actually lost the money he planned to claim was stolen. He had been practicing his fake accusation in the bathroom, left the cash behind, and had been too focused on his vindictive plan to notice it was gone. He had accused Marcus of a crime that he himself had not even successfully committed. It was a cell phone of epic, historical proportions. Gerald Finch, his entire world collapsing into a pile of cheddar-scented rubble, was spun around and handcuffed by the police officer he had just tried to weaponize. Karpov, who had come out to watch the perp walk, saw his promoter being arrested and silently, shamefacedly, retreated back inside, his grandmaster status now a smoking crater. The charges for Finch were not just minor. They piled up in real time. Filing a false report, attempted false arrest, obstruction of a federal investigation, and, when the FBI later searched his office, embezzlement of the very charity fund he was screaming about. The handcuffs were removed from Marcus's wrists. Professor Williams personally rubbed the circulation back into the boy's hands. I am sorry about this, Williams said, his voice sincere. This is the ugly side of the world we are bringing you into. The side that fears intelligence. It's okay, Marcus said, his voice shaking slightly now that the adrenaline was finally fading. I knew the truth was on the board. I just had to wait for the endgame. This was a truth that played out over the following months with mathematical precision. Marcus was not just cleared, he was celebrated. The story of the chess prodigy who checkmated a frame job was picked up by a major national magazine. The Armstrong Institute used the notoriety to fast-track Marcus's security clearance, turning him into a public face for a new initiative to recruit hyper-intelligent youth into STEM. Gerald Finch's trial was a footnote, a sad, quick affair in which he pleaded guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 5 years of probation and a lifetime ban from any U.S. Chess Federation events. Viktor Karpov, his own reputation in tatters for his role in the conspiracy, quietly retired and wrote a bitter, self-published memoir that sold exactly 12 copies. And for Marcus Chen, he walked into the Armstrong Institute on a Monday morning, his NASA hoodie replaced by a simple lab coat. He was 14 years old, the youngest person ever to hold a Level 4 security clearance. He was shown to his desk, a vast, high-powered computing rig in a sterile white room overlooking the massive, cavernous assembly bay of the Experimental Propulsion Lab. There, suspended in a gantry, was a prototype engine. It was a sleek, radial assembly of graphene lattice plates, glowing with a faint, pulsing blue light. It was the heart of a new kind of starship, and it was built from his designs. Professor Williams stood next to him, looking up at the humming engine. "What do you think?" Williams asked. "That heat dissipation array is misaligned by 0.3 degrees, Marcus said, his mind already running the telemetry. "It will cause a 4% efficiency loss in the secondary plasma burn." A technician nearby, who had been working on the engine for months, overheard the comment and scoffed. "Come on, kid, we calibrated that with a laser micrometer. It's perfect." Professor Williams just smiled, a wide, genuine smile. "Run the diagnostic," he ordered. The technician ran the diagnostic. The screen flashed. Heat dissipation array error, 0.3 degrees. Efficiency penalty, 4.01%. The technician's scoff turned into a look of stunned awe. He looked at Marcus not as a novelty, but as a miracle. You see, Gerald Finch thought he could bury the truth with a lie. But lies are like flimsy pawns on a chessboard. They can only march forward, blind and weak. The truth is a grandmaster's mind. It waits, it plans, it sees the entire board, both the present and the future. And in the end, with a quiet, decisive click, the checkmate is always delivered. Marcus's mind had been forged in silence, in the infinite, complex universe of those 64 squares. And that mind just happened to hold the keys to a much larger universe. As Marcus sat down at his terminal, his fingers flying over the keyboard to correct the engine's alignment, he paused. He pulled out his phone, not to play a game, but to look at a photo. It was a picture of his mother, wearing her waitress uniform, standing proudly in front of the diner. He texted her a picture of the glowing blue engine. The caption read, "We did it, Mom. We escaped the gravity well." The journey hadn't ended with the defeat of his bully. It had started there, launching him on a trajectory that had never been about revenge, but about escape velocity. The gravity of petty, small-minded men like Gerald Finch and Viktor Karpov was immense. It was the gravity of jealousy, of mediocrity, of a system that wanted him to fail because his success illuminated their own inadequacy. But Marcus had generated just enough thrust, a thrust of intellect, patience, and an unshakable faith in the truth, to break free of their pull. And as he looked at the engine, his engine, humming with the promise of interstellar travel, he knew that the sky was no longer the limit. It was just the starting line. What those small men never understood is that you can't frame a person whose entire life is a picture of reality. You can't steal the future of someone who builds engines. And you can't, under any circumstances, beat a grandmaster of logic at his own game. The pieces were set, the board was clear, and Marcus Chen was just getting started. The next move, he knew, was the stars. If you enjoyed this epic tale of intellectual triumph and karmic justice, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories of underdogs turning the tables. Let me know in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Marcus's shoes during that false accusation? I'll see you in the next one.